The Veth-Karn arrived on Kael's family homestead in the back of a relief crate, which was not the standard delivery method for a critically injured apex predator. But the storm that had shattered Harrow Station's outbuilding the previous night had not been particularly interested in standard delivery methods. Kael Orvis was 15 years old and had been awake since the thunder started. He was the one who heard the crate in the mudfield, and he was the one who found the hatch cracked open with rain pooling inside, and he was the one who put his lantern in first and saw the animal staring back at him from beneath a tangle of broken strapping and 2 inches of standing water. He had never seen a Veth-Karn in person. He knew what they were from his father's identification charts: the thick, double-ridged skull, the forward-facing eyes set wide enough apart to track movement in near dark, the 4 limbs built for sustained pursuit over rough terrain. The adults were territorial solitary hunters that the settlement board had classified as a Category 3 wildlife hazard. This one was a cub, or something close to it, maybe 40 kilograms, barely hock-high on a grown specimen, and one of its hind limbs was bent in a direction that made Kael's stomach tighten when he looked at it too long. It looked back at him without blinking. He did the only thing that made sense. He climbed in. His father found him in the crate 2 hours later with the Veth-Karn's broad skull resting across his knees and his jacket draped over the animal's shaking frame. The lantern was still going. Kael had one hand pressed flat against the animal's ribcage, feeling for the breath, which was there, irregular but present. "Kael," his father said, and then stopped. "Its leg is bad," Kael said. "I think it's a fracture. We need the splinting kit from the med locker." His father looked at the animal. He was not a man who alarmed easily. 30 years of running a frontier homestead in the outer reaches of Harrow Colony had corrected that tendency. But he stood in the crate doorway for a long moment in the rain. "The wildlife board is going to want to know about this," he said at last. "I know," Kael said. Tonight it needs the splinting kit." The wildlife officer arrived from Harrow Station 3 days later. Her name was Coordinator Sen, a compact Drevali woman with a hand scanner, and the specific patience of someone who had explained inconvenient regulations to homesteaders before. She walked into the barn with her scanner already running and stopped when she saw the Veth-Karn cub lying in the clean straw with its injured leg in a proper splint, and the boy sitting cross-legged beside it, reading from a battered flora guide. The Veth-Karn raised its head, watched her approach, and then lowered its head back onto Kael's knee. Coordinator Sen looked at this for a moment. Then she looked at the leg. The splint was correct. The joint alignment was correct. She had to admit the alignment was correct, and then she looked at the boy again. "How long have you been doing that?" she said. "Sitting with it." "Yes." "Most of the time," Kael said, "since we found it." Sen wrote something in her scanner. "A cub this age without its mother doesn't have a good prognosis in a colony setting," she said. "The standard protocol is transport to the rehabilitation station at Veth Base. They have the equipment." "It's eating," Kael said. She looked at the feeding bowl in the corner, stripped protein and soft grain, the bowl thoroughly cleaned. "What is it eating?" Kael named the ingredients. Sen wrote them down without comment, which was, in her professional experience, the correct response when a 15-year-old on a frontier homestead had independently figured out a nutritionally sound diet for a Category 3 wildlife juvenile. "I'll need to reassess in 4 weeks," she said. "If the leg heals clean and the animal is stabilized, the rehabilitation track can continue here." She paused. "That means regular check-ins, monthly assessments, if at any point it becomes a safety risk." "I know," Kael said. She filed the report. She did not recommend transport. She was not entirely certain why, except that when she had walked toward the cub with her scanner raised, every instinct the animal possessed should have put it on its feet and moving for the barn wall. Instead, it had watched her with those forward-set amber eyes, and then simply laid its head back down on the boy's knee. and there was something in that gesture that she was not able to classify under any of her standard protocol headings. She came back in 4 weeks. The leg had healed clean. The Veth-Karn grew quickly. By Kael's 16th year, it was larger than any of the survey specimens on file for the region, 1.20 meters at the shoulder, dense with the layered muscle that the species used for sprint pursuit. The double ridge of its skull developed enough to show the faint iridescence the older survey texts described as a maturity marker. The amber eyes had darkened slightly, gaining a depth that the colony's wildlife board called intimidating in their assessment notes, and that Kael privately thought looked like something that had seen a great deal and understood most of it. It had a name, Thresh, which was Kael's father's reluctant suggestion, and which had stuck because the cub had been known to level the grain thresher's output rack with its tail when it moved through the barn too quickly. The name appeared in 6 consecutive Wildlife Board assessment reports and 1 strongly worded letter from the regional hazard coordinator, who had arrived at the homestead for an inspection and found the animal in question lying on its back in the yard with all 4 limbs extended, receiving a focused scratch behind the secondary ridge from the boy, who had determined by experiment that this was the location Thresh found most satisfying. The regional hazard coordinator had stood in the yard for a full minute before she wrote anything down. The hazard notation she filed described the animal as calm, bonded, apparently well socialized. She did not mention the scratch. Some things did not translate well into official language. Thresh followed Kael everywhere that was not off-limits, and Kael had made very few things off-limits. The Veth-Karn walked at his heel through the east fields, sat outside the equipment shed when he was inside repairing machinery, and had once escorted Kael to the colony's resupply hub, where it had moved through the main market corridor with the quiet, fluid attention of an animal that was cataloging every exit, every elevation change, and every being in the space simultaneously, while Kael bought seed stock and replacement parts. The resupply hub had been noticeably quiet during that visit. The other colonists and the station traders who had never seen a full-sized Veth-Karn in a market corridor gave Thresh a wide berth that Kael thought was slightly excessive, given that Thresh was actively ignoring all of them in favor of keeping her head at the level of Kael's shoulder, and monitoring the upper gantry with the professional thoroughness of something that had decided the gantry was the most credible threat vector in the building. "She does that," Kael said to the supply clerk, who had frozen with both hands on the counter. "She's not going to do anything, she's just checking." The supply clerk did not appear to find this comforting. Coordinator Sen, who had accompanied them because the colony board had required a wildlife escort for the transit permit, wrote in her assessment that quarter that the animal's behavior in the resupply hub had been consistent with a protection orientation. The 3-word phrase covered a great deal of territory, including the fact that when a piece of overhead rigging had broken loose from the upper gantry and fallen toward the market floor, Thresh had moved from still to full sprint in the fraction of a second it took Kael to register the sound, planted herself between him and the falling equipment, and caught the impact across her shoulders without flinching. The rigging weighed 90 kilograms. Kael had been standing in the clear by then anyway. Thresh had known this. She had gone anyway. Sen filed her assessment report. She added a note to the Wildlife Board that the animal's Category 3 classification might benefit from a formal review. The board did not disagree. The wild pack found the homestead in Kael's 17th year, toward the end of the dry season, when the feed grass had gone pale, and the heat shimmer over the east fields ran all day from dawn to dark. There were 5 of them, 4 adults and a sub-adult that had not yet reached full ridge development, and they came out of the ridge forest at dusk on a Tuesday, which Kael only remembered because he had been repairing the east fence that afternoon and had not quite finished when the light started going. He saw them first from the fence line, 5 dark shapes at the tree margin, still as the trees themselves, watching the farm. Thresh was at his side. She had been at his side all afternoon. She went very still when the pack appeared, and the stillness was different from her ordinary stillness, deeper, more rooted. The way a body goes quiet when something in it is listening to a frequency it had not heard in a long time. Kael stood at the fence and did not move. The lead adult, heavier than Thresh, the ridge markings of a fully mature specimen, the kind of mass the wildlife text said took 4 to 5 years to build, crossed from the tree margin to the middle distance in 30 seconds flat without apparent effort, and stopped, and looked at Thresh with an attention that had nothing casual in it. Thresh looked back. None of them moved for a long time. Then Thresh took one step forward. Just one. She looked back at Kael, a full turn of her head, those amber eyes finding his face in the low light with the precision she had always used, the look that meant she was checking where he was. He had seen that look every day for 2 years. He kept his face still. He put one hand briefly on the fence post, not reaching for her, not holding on, just resting his palm on the wood the way you rest a hand on something you want to remember the shape of. "Go on," he said quietly. She looked at him for another moment. Then she turned, and she walked toward the pack, and the lead adult lowered its head as she approached in a gesture that Coordinator Sen would later, when Kael described it to her, identify as a formal recognition display. Reserved, in Veth-Karn pack structure, for a returning adult who had been separated and was being acknowledged as belonging. Not a stray, not a juvenile, an adult who had been somewhere else and had come home. The subadult broke formation and moved to circle Thresh with the quick, inquisitive energy of a young animal meeting something new and not yet having the manners to conceal its curiosity. Thresh bore this inspection with the patience she had always had, a patience Kael recognized, because he had been on the receiving end of it when she was young, and he was the new thing she was evaluating. The pack moved back toward the ridge forest in the last light, and Thresh went with them, and Kael stood at the fence until the tree line swallowed them all, and the field was dark and empty and very quiet. He stayed there for a while longer. The fence post was still warm from the afternoon sun. He kept his hand on it. Coordinator Sen found him at the fence at full dark, because she had been in the habit of checking in at the homestead in person since the beginning of the dry season, when the regional wildlife surveys had begun picking up pack movement in the ridges, and she had understood what that movement likely meant. She stood beside him at the fence and did not say anything for a minute. "How long ago?" she said. "An hour maybe," Kael said. She nodded. She had her scanner, but she did not take it out. "She'll come back," Sen said carefully, "for a while. They do, young adults who were raised in close contact with." "I know," Kael said. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the tree line. His voice was even and quiet and exactly the same as it had always been. Sen stood with him at the fence for a while. After some time she said, "The board is going to want a final assessment filed, for the record." "I know." "I'll write it," she said. "You don't have to." In the assessment she filed the following week, Coordinator Sen noted that the Veth-Karn designated in prior reports as Thresh had been successfully integrated into a local pack structure during the current season's migration cycle, and that the integration had occurred without incident. She noted the animal's age, its health status, its origin. She noted the 2 years of rehabilitation care provided at the Orvis family homestead, Harrow Colony, by a minor, age 15 to 17, with no prior wildlife handling credentials. She wrote outcome, successful. Duration of care, 26 months. Condition at release, full adult health, full social integration, classification reviewed and reduced. She paused at the keyboard for a moment before she wrote the last line. Caretaker age at intake, 15. At release, 17. Method of release, voluntary. No incident. She left it at that. Some things translated into official language well enough, if you chose the words correctly. Some things were simply what they were: a boy at a fence in the dark, his hand on a post, watching the tree line go quiet, having understood that the hardest version of caring for something was the version that asked you to open your hands. Thresh came back 3 times that first season. Each time less time at the fence, more time in the ridge, the pack waiting at the tree margin the way packs wait for a member who has unfinished business before the season turns. The 3rd time she came, she stayed for less than an hour, and when she went she did not look back. Kael had been expecting that. He had been ready for it since the first night at the fence. He was still at the fence when she disappeared into the trees for the last time. His hand was not on the post. He was standing straight, watching the place where she had gone, and his face was calm and completely clear, the way a face gets when a person has already finished their grieving and reached the part on the other side that doesn't have a name yet but holds together anyway.